Welcome back to another episode of the Randy Wilson Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Wilson. We're still covering the mayor candidates, and today we have another exciting interview with candidate Danny Avula. But before we get into that, thank you for continuing to watch the show. We're getting a lot of great engagement, a lot of great feedback from you guys in regard to some of our previous episodes. We just recently had Andreas Addison, Jamie Swain from VPM, and we're getting a lot of great engagement from you guys. So thank you for continuing to watch our show. Remember, you can catch this podcast everywhere podcasts are played, but I'm going to encourage you to go over to YouTube because the gentleman didn't even realize he's going to be on camera today, so you get a chance to see him. You can also go to randywilsonpodcast.com, and again, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell. Danny, doctor, what are we going about today?
Super informal,
Randy.
Is
Danny today?
Danny is great.
Well, I mean, it's not just Danny, okay? I mean, you know, you've built such a resume for yourself. You are a doctor, obviously. You have been Richmonder of the Year. You've been known as the COVID czar. Like you've got a very impressive resume. And so I guess, you know, one night you sit down with a family and you said, hey, what about just adding mayor to the list, huh?
I don't know if it quite happened like that.
What happened? Tell me how that happened.
Yeah, you know, Randy, I moved to Richmond in 2000 to go to medical school, fell in love with the city, fell in love with the city story. And so my wife and I and the family that we've raised have just been really invested here for a really long time. And so, you know, a big chunk of that career was as public health director, but I would say just as important to me has been all of the non-professional ways that we've been engaged just as neighbors in the East End and as community members and advocates and being invested in Richmond Public Schools. And so there has been this 20-year build of passion for this city and hope and aspiration for this city. And so, you know, I spent the last 3 years of my career at the state level, which was incredibly meaningful work. And I'm really grateful for the chance that we had to do that I had to do that. But what it also made me realize is that my heart is with this city and the work that I love. What I loved so much about my work in public health was this, like the connectedness to the place that I am. And so, you know, as I started to think more and more about where Richmond is headed and how my gifts and my heart for this place might align with that, my wife and I took a couple months to say, you know, like, are we in a good place, right? Is our marriage and our family in a good place for us to make a pretty big decision to try to throw our hat in the ring here? And so around end of February, early March, we said, yeah, let's give it a shot. So here we are.
Was there something specific that kind of channeled that moment, or I don't get the impression that you obviously, you're a doctor. I don't think you came up saying one day I want to be a politician.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. So
quite the opposite, in fact, man. No, I will say the specific thing, and again, it wasn't a moment, but it was 20 years of living in the East End and watching what has happened to my community there. You know, we moved in 2004, really motivated to be in a kind of community where we could build relationships across race, across class, and have kind of this village concept, you know? And I, in my college years and in my medical school years, was really both drawn to issues around racial disparity and really trying to address root causes. And we had been exposed to some pretty inspirational folks down in Jackson, Mississippi, who had done a lot of like racial healing work by bringing Black and white communities together, living, serving together. And so that was in many ways a blueprint for my wife and I to move into North Church Hill back in 2004. And I would say, Randy, for like 10, 12 years of that time, it was this incredible experience, right? My wife was teaching in the elementary school there. I was doing residency and then ultimately working in the city government with the city health department. And we just had this incredible network of relationships of you know, young people who were helping me understand what it was like to grow up without a lot of resource, with challenges in their family, with not being sure if you'd have food on the table the next day or not. But it was also our family. You know, as we started to raise our kids, my neighbors next door, Reggie and Bertha, became their surrogate grandparents in so many ways. You know, and so we had this incredible experience of community. And then what's happened over the last 7 or 8 years has been the development of North Churchill, which in some ways has been great, right? Like we have Sorosa, we have Union Market, we have these great restaurants and amenities. But as housing prices have creeped up, not just creeped, like shot up, many of my neighbors, and especially my Black neighbors, have been pushed out. And so a lot of that community ended up in the counties, and that's true for both renters who couldn't keep up with their rent, but also for generational homeowners, you know. And so that property taxes got to a point they didn't have access to capital in the same way that other folks did, and so they ended up getting pushed out of their neighborhood. And so, you know, you asked, like, what was the thing? And the thing for me was watching my neighborhood develop over 20 years and feeling like, you know, we as a city could have done something different. We could have capped property taxes for long-term residents. We could have made earlier investments in affordable housing and preserved like that beautiful fabric and diverse community that I think so many of us want. But it takes intention from the leadership of government. And so I said, you know, Richmond is on this incredible development arc, right? Like, best town to visit in the country. Like, we've gotten so many accolades over the last few years, and people keep coming, especially post-COVID when you can work from anywhere. People keep coming here. And I just felt like, you know, what happened in Churchill, what has happened in a bunch of North Side, what is happening in Manchester, like that is going to happen throughout the entire city if we do not make different decisions about who we're prioritizing, who's benefiting from the development of the city. And I just, you know, like as when I was public health director, a huge part of what we focused on was the disparity in health outcomes, but the health outcomes are tied to educational outcomes, to wealth, to job opportunity. And so, you know, as public health director, I began to think more and more holistically about what is it that makes communities thrive and healthy. And so, you know, for so many reasons, it made sense for me and my family to say, you know what, we would love to try to serve the city in this way.
You know, one of the things that I got out of our recent conversation with Andreas that I found to be interesting, we talked about Scott's Addition and Manchester as being communities that are developing that were not planned.
Yeah.
And as you just mentioned, you know, when you look at these things that's happening in Manchester, when you look at what's happening in Churchill, some good, some maybe not so much. You know, I'm of the impression that Richmond is a city that really doesn't want to change, but so much. I mean, like, I think people like Richmond for Richmond. And there's a lot of people who sometimes, you know, we've had, we've made the trips to Charlotte, we've made the trips to other cities to look at how other cities build their infrastructure and grow. But at the end of the day, I think the core of Richmond wants Richmond to just be Richmond and doesn't want to, doesn't want to be a larger city. You know, I think Richmonders like the accessibility of being able to go into where they want to in a car.
Yeah, no doubt.
You know, do you think that the city, when you look at the changes that's happened in some of these communities, what do you think are the pros and cons and how things are developing versus whether they've been planned or not? Scott's Addition, not so much planned. There's no sidewalks. And these are things I've kind of gathered. It's good that we're having this conversation now because there's some things on my mind that have came from some of the previous guests that I feel like it just can only add to
this conversation for sure. I mean, I would say maybe the biggest aspect of planning that I want to make sure that we're focused on is what are the unintended consequences of investment, right? Because growth is really good, right? We have been a city that has really struggled with revenues for so long and have not had the resources to invest in aging school infrastructure and aging sewer infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. And so, you know, 62 square miles, we need to grow, right? Like the plans that went into the Richmond 300 plan, the goal to get to, you know, somewhere around 300,000 city residents to mimic where we were back in the early 1900s. The city has the capacity to have a denser population, and that is actually what we're going to need to do to increase the revenues of the city. We do need to build more housing. We do need to develop undeveloped parts of the city. But to your point, like what people love about Richmond is like the neighborhoods and the livability and the closeness to the river, and just like what makes a community really dynamic is kind of, you get out there and there's trees and cool restaurants, and so I think development has to be a balance, right? So it's got to be a balance of not overdeveloping a neighborhood and really giving a nod to the architecture and the history and the character of a neighborhood, but then being really smart about where you can increase density, where you can blend the old with the new. And then I would say the unintended consequence piece that's particularly important to me is, what does new development and new investment do to the long-term residents of that community? And have we made sure that we're putting, the safety net in place to make sure that those long-term residents can stay and can continue to be a part of the community that they, in many ways, have built?
Got it. How familiar are you with this podcast? If any at all?
Yeah, I mean, I listened to a recent episode just to sort of get a little bit of your vibe, and I feel like you actually hit me up on LinkedIn, a year ago, or maybe sometime during COVID, and so that was when you first got on my radar.
Got it. So we're known for asking straight questions.
Sure.
The questions come a lot of the times. I survey our audience, to find out, and particularly as we're covering mayor candidates, like, sometimes in these forums, you have limited opportunity to speak, get your point out. So we want you to get your full point out. But, some of the feedback that we've got is that, and in respect to Kim Greenidge, he's obviously a big deal. We don't want to, but sometimes our listeners say, hey, these are the questions that we want to hear with the passion behind it. And they don't get a chance to often ask those questions. So some of the questions that I'll ask you will be from our audience and we humanize situations. At the end of the day, we're all people, and you're running for an office for the people, of the people, which we consider ourselves a podcast for the culture, from the culture. And so there's a couple tough questions that I feel like I've been presented with that you'll be able to receive, okay?
Absolutely.
But no harm by any means.
You mentioned Kim Greenidge. I thought you were going to go a different direction. Kim is great. He and I, back in maybe 2016, 2017, were part of VCU's Dancing with the Stars.
Oh, really?
And so, I actually won Dancing with the Stars. But Kim, every time I sees it, like, never lets me forget it, because he thought he should have won. Right?
But before I go there, I mean, I think that's the thing with you. Like, you're obviously a very likable person.
Thanks, Rady.
I mean, that's what everyone says. Richmonder of the Year. I guess, would you say a big part of that was because of your leadership with the COVID thing? Yeah,
I think for sure the Style
kind of a big
Weekly
deal.
One was, I was actually honored as one of the RTD's People of the Year prior to COVID. That was in 2019. Wow. So I think it is, in many ways, it's just like having a long-term commitment, and a lot of the work that we've done in public health to really raise up issues that people aren't thinking about. I mean, I've been talking for years about the impact of redlining back in the 40s and 50s and what that has done for disparities in wealth and flourishing today. And so I think, I've served in a lot of different roles in a lot of different organizations and had a deep connection to the people of this community.
So there's no such thing as being faced with a hard question.
Yeah.
So I think the toughest thing that I've heard people ask, want to know is, you've been so successful as a doctor.
Yeah.
What do you say to people out there who question, who may be a little leery on what your ultimate goal is? Like, for people who say they want a mayor and a leader for the city, maybe 2 terms, like, what do you say to those people? Because there are people that think that you may have another goal in mind, because you've been in a doctor role for so long as far as a leader in healthcare. And I think people, when they ask this question, the impression I get is they look at the Ralph Northams and other doctors that have been, doctors that have moved into politics. So like, what do you say to those folks? Like, is there a bigger picture with you? Is there a bigger goal? Or is Richmond for those voters who might be undecided right now? What do you speak? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a super easy question to answer, right? I mean, my heart is this city, and I had the opportunity to both serve professionally and work in the city that I love, and then to go do stuff at the state level, right? I was leading the statewide COVID response. I was the commissioner of social services at the state level, and had an opportunity to really have significant impact at scale. And again, I'm super thankful for that. Like, it was a really good learning opportunity, a great way to serve the state. But what I realized, and I think as you get further along in your career, like, you know what you're good at, what your gifts are, but really like where your heart is, you know? And for me, undeniable, it's this city. And so, our family gave up a lot to do this, right? Like, I left a job to run full time.
Completely?
And yeah.
Really?
I quit. I was serving as commissioner of social services, and I resigned April 9th, started the campaign April 10th.
So you're not working in any hospitals or anything
I'm
like
doing
that?
a little bit of hospital work just to try. I got 5 kids, man.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You got to pay some bills.
got to pay some bills. That's right.
But as I say that's the question, though. It's like, man, the city's job is probably $150,000, give or take, roughly.
125.
So, exactly. Yeah. So you're like, you got the Cosby Show at home. You got kids to feed. You got a lot of mouths to feed. It's like you're even making, we don't know what to making what we know. Yeah. That's a big change.
No, it is definitely a big change. And I think that, I mean, at the end of the day,
you're putting the city. I'm not gonna say you're putting it before your family, but it's because of of the environment where you live, the city that you really want to put your foot. You literally put your foot in, your hand in,
that's right,
your whole body in there.
I think Randy, we like as a family, we've made a lot of these decisions along the way, right? Like growing up Indian, like it was either IT or medicine, right? Like that's what Indian kids do in this country. And I think my dad really wanted his kids to be successful, and probably wanted me to be a cardiologist or a gastroenterologist or one of those doctors that makes real money, right? And I decided in med school that what I was really interested in was solving the issues that create equity. And so from that point on, I already made decisions to kind of sacrifice money and having, a different path because because of my heart and what I feel like my faith compels me to in terms of the kind of work I want to be invested in. And so, dating back to, college and med school, I think my wife and I have already started to think about, like, what is it to live a meaningful life and to serve a community that you're a part of? And so, and $125,000 isn't a ton, but it's still a lot of money. And we can my wife is a teacher, like we can make that work. And the opportunity to like make that work and support our family of 7 while really like serving the city, I just felt like it's like that's not really a concern for us.
That's a good answer. And that's your answer, people. That's a good answer, though. Yeah. So how do you feel that your experience translates?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, having lived and been deeply engaged in the city for as long as I have, there is this like knowledge and history
lived
and connection. Yeah. And I would say that the lived experience certainly of like Richmond and what I love about the city and being a part of this sort of narrative arc about a history rooted in being the capital of the Confederacy and really raw conversations about race and black and white power dynamics. And feeling like there is a desire for a path forward and a desire to make sure that we're being honest about our history and the way that we have oppressed vulnerable communities, oppressed African-American communities, and wanting to figure out, okay, like what does it mean to operationalize equity? What does it mean to actually be invested, to create opportunity and to lift those communities up? Like that's the story I want to be a part of. And so there's that part, of having lived here and been a part of those macro conversations. There is the kind of secondhand lived experience of having lived in the community and having close friends and ultimately a family member. We adopted our daughter from the neighborhood. I'm happy to talk more about that. But she grew up in public housing and came to us when she was 17, and that has been transformational for our family, right? Like the way that my wife and I see the world and understand the challenges of poverty, the way that her 4 younger siblings now have a lens through their older Black sister who's like every dinner conversation, you know, we're talking through pretty meaty issues. And so between our Janae and just the network of deep friendships and relationships, and my wife having taught for most of the last 20 years at Chimborazo Elementary, there is this connection to so many of our neighbors who have helped shape the way that we approach public service. And then, I mean, I think the other thing that probably translates more than anything is what do we want in the next CEO of the city? Because at the end of the day, we've got to realize that the major job of the leader of the city is to ensure that local government is serving the people of the city, right? And I think, you know, we've made some great strides as a city, but this is an election, but we're actually hiring a CEO, right? We're hiring the CEO of a $2.8 billion agency with 3,000 plus employees. And so the experiences that I've had as local public health director, merging the Richmond and Henrico health departments back in 2018, doing deep regional work to do that, having led through the crisis of COVID, both regionally and then at the state level, and then having the opportunity to lead a $2.6 billion agency in the Department of Social Services. Like, there's a track record of executive leadership, of making organizations better, of improving organizational culture that I want to bring to City Hall to make sure that the City Hall is serving residents in the way that they deserve.
Would you agree with this statement that this current campaign, this current election process for the mayor candidates is not the most exciting race I've ever seen? Would you agree?
Not the most exciting race?
I mean, I quite frankly, I think I'm a little disappointed. I just feel like
you want some more drama?
I want some enthusiasm. I really do. I mean, like, I'm not, and I say that sincerely. Like, I don't feel like it's getting I just don't feel like people are as excited as maybe even previous. I don't know. I mean,
it's interesting. I don't know. Like, I'm in it every day.
Yeah.
And so all day, every day, like, this is a very welcome break from what I get to do every day. And, you know, every night I'm showing up at events or gatherings, and there does seem to be an enthusiasm about trying to suss out. And so maybe, I don't know, maybe that hasn't spilled over to the population at large yet. It's been a while. I mean, obviously the last election was in the middle of COVID. And so it was really hard for anyone to kind of give it the attention. And so, I don't know. I
think because Stoney has been in there twice.
Okay.
And that there's now, he's not going to be back, obviously. Right. I think that this to me, it's a big deal. It's an opportunity here. And I don't know. I'm looking for something. I don't know. I feel like it could be, that's part of my motivation for wanting to get all these candidates on. Like, I want to,
I'm glad you're doing it,
let's get it going here. Like, come on. But I don't know though. You're right. You're in the middle of it. Maybe
I just look at my calendar for the next 2 months and I'm like, 15 mayoral forums. There's clearly an appetite to like get in front of candidates and to hear what
15?
At least, we've done, I don't know, we've probably done 7 or 6 so far, something like 6 or 7. And then, I think there's 12 to 15 left on the calendar between now and election.
You guys
day.
will be checking this interview out for some prep work and your questions, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So in your process as it pertains to, like, you know, you and your competitors, do you what's the climate like as far as like, I mean, do you feel that it's a friendly, healthy race, or?
Yeah, it has for the most part felt really positive, right? I mean, I think I'm super encouraged for the city because there's a bunch of people who are passionate, who really care about the city for the most part, who I think are in this for the right reasons. And so I think that's great for Richmond.
Well, you know, my sources tell me.
Okay.
My sources tell me that you're in the top 2.
Well, that's
based on numbers, it's like, you know, I kind of predict a runoff.
Okay.
I don't know, but
right. I'm hoping that's not the case. But
hey, I don't live in the city.
Okay.
Don't live too far out of it, but my contribution to the city and to the region is helping influence those who have the ability to vote.
Yeah.
But it's looking good for you.
Yeah, no, things feel really good. I mean, I think both from just when I'm knocking on doors, like it is really great. You know, I was down in the 8th district recently, and you know, almost every door I went to were like, "Oh, you're the doc from TV," you know.
Yeah.
And so to be able to make that connection with a face that like they knew and trusted for months on end during COVID, and then and then make that connection to the name, which most people have forgotten at this point. It's been really encouraging. And so that's some of the work is just to like harken back to that season where, you know, like I was on the local news 4 to 5 times a week for several months.
Yeah.
And so I think what people appreciated that was consistency, clarity of communication, and transparency.
Yeah, I would say so as well.
You know, even 4 years later, the feedback I get is like, "Hey, thank you for just like telling the truth and being a person that we could trust to help get us through that time of crisis."
Yeah. So you're not a politician.
Yeah, would you? I mean, I have to be now, right? Like I've chosen to run for office, and so by definition, But yeah, I've never aspired to get into politics. Right? The only thing I've aspired to do is to really serve the communities that I'm a part of.
So I lead this question that way, though. The reason I say that because a lot of times with, you know, experienced, practiced politicians who do this every election, right? When they're coming into a situation, coming into a campaign to earn a position, they're often talk about all the things that are they would do that they would change because of whoever's holding that position. They didn't do right. They didn't do their job. You vote for me because what the problem is this. So you've been involved with the current administration.
Sure.
You've acknowledged and spoke, as many people do, about how great of a city this is.
Absolutely.
What I'm curious about is if you come into this position from a foundational level based on how it is now, what are you excited about that you feel like is moving well, that don't require a lot of change, versus where do you feel like the most work is necessarily needed to take the city to the next level?
Yeah. I mean, I think
because a lot of people come in and say, you know, like I don't even want to use Stony as an example. Let's look at the presidential, like, you know, there are people out there that just don't like Biden or don't think that he's the best person, you know, so they're coming in and saying what Trump was saying, what he will do.
Yeah.
Oh, vice versa, Kamala's talking about, you know, why not? I don't, you know, like, so like you've already worked and been involved in this administration, so you know the good that it has.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm curious of both sides of it from the direction that we go forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think that it is clear that like what the issues facing the next chapter of the city are, right? You know, when I'm like, I've basically spent the last, 5 months doing a survey of what do the residents of this community want. And I will say, you know, the things that we've done well as a city are, you know, engaging people. Like people are moving here left and right. And so I think a lot of the national attention we've gotten for the way that we've stewarded a hard conversation about our history and about being clear about justice and equity moving forward, right? Like I think that's been great. We've had a real time of strength in supporting the arts and culture community, and VCU has been a massive part of that. I think we can continue to improve in terms of the city's investment in public art, and I'm really excited to have the opportunity to do that. But like, this is a crazy good art town, right? I mean, just like the quality of what you see on the streets, the museums, the cultural impact that our arts community has. I think, you know, we've done a pretty good job of stewarding a phenomenal amenity in the James River, right? Like our park system around there, like the bike trails, the walking trails.
Got to work on the water a little bit.
Sure, but I would say like in 20 years, we've actually done a lot of really good work on the water. And so, I just think that there's a vibe in Richmond that has evolved over the last decade. I mean, this is a really different town than when I got here in 2000, right?
When you came in 2000.
2000, yeah.
I came in 03, so.
Yeah. And so, you know, like there's no denying that like this is a more inclusive place, right? I mean, I think the LGBTQ community is so strong here, and I think Mayor Stoney in particular has done a really good job of making the city a welcoming place for everybody and helping them see like, hey, we're a part of Richmond too. And so, I think from a culture standpoint, Richmond has come a really long way since when I got here. I think the three things that I hear over and over and over again: schools, housing, and then the basic operations and service delivery of City Hall. And so those are the things that I'm really focused on, and really where I think my skills align themselves well, right? I mean, I think, as I was saying earlier, the next CEO of the city really needs to work on building the culture, improving service delivery, rebuilding trust with a community that, in some ways has lost trust in their local government. And so there's a lot of just, delivering on services like basic local government work that's got to get done.
Because of your healthcare background, human service background, how do you see the city improving as it pertains to bringing that in, like the law enforcement, like bringing that together? Because you didn't mention public safety.
Yeah, it's probably the next one on the list. That I mean, just I
feel like your background could be. Your background was, you obviously did not have a background in law enforcement, but we see across the country. Across the country right now the hybrid approach of how we're trying to bring law enforcement and human services together to help address those vulnerable individuals who need a different type of approach.
Yeah. I'll start maybe even before we get to the public safety conversation in the recognition that, over the years and particularly post-COVID, we've just seen acute mental health crises and substance use really ratchet up. I'm encouraged that the city has created an office of homelessness, has hired folks who are like out on the street connecting with some of our unhoused residents and really trying to build more of a relationship with that community. We've got to invest more there, right? Because ultimately, what we're going to need to do to be successful in supporting the unhoused community is get to know them, right? Really understand what are the challenges they're facing. Do we need substance use treatment? Do we need to get them into mental health treatment? Do we need to make sure that they have some permanent supportive housing that where really it all starts? And then how do you build a pathway out of that back to stable living, right? And I think you see it on Broad Street, right? Over the years, and in the last 3 years particularly, there's just a more palpable presence of the unhoused community. And so we've got to come aside them with compassion and empathy, and then a real commitment to how do we figure out how to get them back into housing and back towards productive lives. So. Sorry, go ahead.
No, well, I heard Stoney one time say something in the past about, we need to, he'd like to put more officers on bicycles in communities. I don't know if I saw that really. What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, I think
more like community policing too with that.
Yeah, I think community policing is absolutely the direction we need to go. I think Mayor Stoney, I think the current police chief really believe in that. The challenge is that we have a 30% vacancy rate in our police force. And so it becomes really difficult to do some of the aspiration of what the police force should look like when you're really having trouble covering the basic surveillance needs. So part of this is rebuilding the police force by really coming alongside and saying, hey, we are supportive of you. We recognize that there are ways that in the past and certainly throughout the country, we've seen policing practices that have not been great. When we look at data around incarceration rates, we know that there is unconscious bias that plays in. And so we've got to be really committed to making that conscious and really training and equipping our police force to respond in different ways, right? And I would say that, in the couple conversations I've had with our police chief, we're on that track. I'm really encouraged by what I'm hearing from the current police chief, by his commitment to data, his commitment to transparency, and his understanding of how we need to evolve policing. And I think with that, and with a support of a mayor, and with the recent collective bargaining that actually gives Richmond police slightly higher pay than the average in the region, we will start to see a building of that police force that gets us to a place where, we can do more beat cops who are walking the streets, who are getting to know their neighbors, getting to know the small businesses. And that's absolutely where we need to go. But it is going to take a couple years to get there, I think.
Have you been able to do any type of assessment of City Hall currently, like from the standpoint of like, if you're elected mayor day one and you go in there, are you going to have to bring a whole new administration staff, or are you going to clean up this? Like, have you been able to assess that? Have you been able to identify? Are you already identifying people that you would like to be a part of your administration?
Yeah, I have not yet, and part of that is just that I don't have access to the inner workings of City Hall, and a lot of that has come through both the media and then through people's individual experiences with City Hall. Some of which are great, right?
Yeah.
They put a thing into 311 and they get a response, and they're like, "Oh, our city's working." And some that are really frustrating, like getting a $10,000 utility bill and not having somebody who can pick up the phone and resolve it for you. And so it's a pretty mixed report that I'm getting. And I think, what I've been really focused on since I jumped in April 10th is the pathway to getting elected.
The people.
Yeah. And then ultimately, if elected November 5th, the work starts November 6th to start to do that deep assessment and figure out. And, some of these folks I know because I've worked with them in the past. And I think there's a lot of really great people who work in City Hall.
Yeah.
I do think, there's some clear areas of focus that this administration has started and that we need to continue to lean into. But it does all start with leadership, right? When you think about what does it take to change the culture of an organization, to increase transparency, to improve service delivery, it starts with leaders. And so, as the next mayor and CEO of City Hall, like my hope and aspiration would be to be a super positive, encouraging, visionary leader for that organization who makes it very clear that we exist to serve the people of Richmond. And the one question that everybody should be asking every day is, how am I resolving an issue for a resident of this city?
As I listen to you talk, and you say a lot of great things, I haven't really heard you focus much on the development piece of like, what is your view as far as helping from an economy standpoint, like growing the economy? Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, for sure. Again, as to our earlier part of this conversation, like part of the magic of this city is the neighborhoods, right? It is like how a neighborhood feels, and the fact that you can go to a bar or a restaurant on the corner that you just love, and it's your place, it's your Cheers, right? And so I think part of our development strategy is to really think about how are we continuing to grow and invest in neighborhoods, and really be true to the character that each of those different neighborhoods has.
All right, the pushback. Pushback though is like we got enough restaurants and breweries.
Okay. Breweries probably. Restaurants, I feel I actually, I'll say, Randy, like the meals tax challenge and what a lot of restaurant owners have been going through has bled folks to not want to be here anymore. You know, I mean, I was talking to a restaurateur who owns multiple restaurants about a month, maybe 5 weeks ago, and they were looking to start a new location, and they found one that was like, they weren't sure it was on the Richmond Henrico line. They were like, I was just praying it was in Henrico, right? And part of that is the meals tax as a disincentive for folks to come in. Part of it is seeing the local government as a partner that's going to invite you in and be responsive and be really helpful to you getting a new business off the ground. So to the question of development, there's an aspect of development that has to do with housing, right?
Yes.
We've got to ramp up both market rate and affordable housing. We've got to increase the tax base. And then the other part of that is being a good partner to businesses and thinking about what's the role of the meals tax, and is there an opportunity, because it's an issue of competition with the counties. How do we reduce that and lure businesses back in? How do we do some of the easy stuff like put in lighting and planting trees on Broad Street and down in Shockoe Bottom to make these spaces more inviting? And so I don't know that we need like huge development plans. I think we need to do the thoughtful, organic, and smart development neighborhood by neighborhood. And there's plenty of opportunity. I mean,
yeah, that's kind of what I was looking for.
Yeah.
I think you answered it that way. You're not coming in with a big idea on bringing a casino to Richmond or, reopening a Coliseum, building a new Coliseum. That's not really as much the way you're approaching developing the economy of the city.
I think the demand to be here is clear, right? There are people moving in here every week, and so we do need to both think about the best and highest use of spaces, right? So when I was Commissioner of Social Services, our offices were downtown. Our landlord said, you know what, we're not going to renew. We'd been there for 10 years. Landlord said, I'm not going to renew the lease because we're turning this building into apartments. And so I think, a lot of the change in the way that people are working does present an opportunity for a different vision for downtown to really bring residential back, have a lot of first floor retail, and bring some vibrancy to these communities. Like, that's super exciting to think about the way downtown could evolve.
I learned in a recent conversation, which I wasn't familiar with, that there's a lot of property that's owned by the city in Richmond, particularly out in Manchester, Blackwell area, that's just being unoccupied. It's underdeveloped. It's parking lots and spaces that could be developed by the city if they just chose to prioritize as a project.
I think that is true. There's and I don't know the numbers. I've heard like 1,600 parcels, something like that, of city-owned land, and part of that is included in a master plan. Part of it isn't, and so I think the city does have lots of opportunity. Both invest in more housing, think about how you want to develop neighborhoods, make sure that we're prioritizing green space and park infrastructure. And then maybe to have some parts of our community that we're really luring certain types of businesses to, because economic development is going to continue to be a part of how the city evolves.
You mentioned schools. How would you work with the superintendent in the future to help improve the schools?
Yeah.
What's your take on it?
I mean, let me first say I love Richmond Public Schools, right? My wife has taught there for most of the last 20 years. We have 5 kids. They've all been at Richmond Public Schools. We're deeply invested. And I see, part of our family's choice and journey has been recognizing that schools are, one of those structures that drives inequity. And if you want to change it, you've got to invest in it, right? And so we chose to do that personally as a family by having our kids in Richmond Public Schools. And as mayor, it's very clear to me that schools would be one of the housing and schools will be the 2 places that we are investing the most money. And I think, you think about what's going on in Richmond Public Schools now is that we serve a very a high poverty population in many parts of the city. And as you know from the work that you do, like that population requires more supports, right? Like we've got to have more mental health specialists, more social workers. And historically, like we've seen these comparisons around per pupil costs between Richmond and the counties, but the reality is that we deal with we try to support families who have been in cycles of generational poverty, and it actually just does take more investment. Yeah. So I think as mayor, the primary role that the mayor gets to play here is to say we are going to prioritize the funding of schools. Anytime we have another ask of money, we should always ask the question: is that a better investment than investing in our teachers and our students and our families? Yeah. And so the introduced budget will have the biggest opportunity to say this is where our priority is, because we know not only I just
made a lot of progress there too.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think about schools in kind of 2 ways. One, we have seen a lot of families move to Richmond, or a lot of people move to Richmond, have kids, and then decide, hey, I can't do the schools, I'm going to move to the counties. Yeah. And that's a loss for us, right? Because the resource families are leaving the city, that tax base is leaving the city. But more importantly, like we have a moral imperative to make sure that the schools, for the folks who don't have the privilege and the ability to leave and move to the county, we have the moral imperative to make sure that schools are either preparing them for college or preparing them for a career. And so that's so fundamental to what a local community needs, and it has to be part of our financial priority too.
Yeah, yeah. This has been good. What is I know that you got a lot of forums coming up, and you said, how many did you say? You've already had 15?
No, we've already had, I would say 6, maybe 7, and I think there's another 12 to 15 on the calendar.
Got you. Like outside of knocking on doors, shaking hands, and kissing babies, tell me about like what's your strategy look like if you can. Sure. Because one of the things I've noticed for the most part, with the majority of candidates, social media does not seem to be like a big theme that I'm seeing with candidates in this election.
Okay, I was never on social media before I decided to run.
That's what I'm saying, but not only you. I mean, not just you. Like most of the candidates. I mean, Harrison's social media is very low. Andreas posts a little bit more, but he's been in city council. Yeah, Maurice doesn't even have a social media. So everyone's kind of the same in that. And
I got up to 1,000 followers on Instagram this week. I thought that was pretty good. I don't know.
But we're in this time.
Yeah, you're right, man.
So I mean,
Right.
I to me it just kind of stands out. It's interesting because we're so into our phones now that's one of the things I'm not seeing a lot of with this this campaign.
Yeah, if I
Not that it's not everything.
But it's something for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, if I had ever had any idea that I would run for office, like during COVID, if I got on social media,
man, you
I would
blew
have
up.
crushed it, right? So that was a missed opportunity. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just hard to build a following really quickly, right? Like I didn't have social media
Oh yeah, I mean
until
it's
May.
for me too. I mean, as far as podcasts, but I'll tell you, this content will resonate. I mean, I'll do a lot of Instagram stuff. I'll post everywhere.
Okay.
But LinkedIn will really appreciate this conversation.
Okay.
Because of the professional networks that you're affiliated with. So you'll see stuff there as well.
Great.
One of the things I like to do as we turn the fourth quarter and with our interviews, we like to help our audience become more familiar with the more personal side, like not so much the professional or the politics side, but what do you think? Like, there's a lot of people that know you. I'm curious of what you think that people don't know about you that maybe they could learn through this interview. Because I'm gonna ask you some random impulsive questions anyway. But before I do that, I'm gonna let you say like what are the things that you feel like, hey, people probably wouldn't know this about me, but I like watching the Cosby Show on marathons at night with my family. I mean, whatever, random stuff,
What do people not know about me? Let's see. I'm like a.
I mean, Dance with the Stars. Wow, got me with that one. I was not expecting that one.
Yeah, I wasn't either, but it was fun. It was great.
So you got a little rhythm.
It was a waltz, so And listen, my partner was a professional dancer, and she was phenomenal. And so I was just riding coattails. Man.
Gotcha.
Riding coattails. I'm like a weird fantasy football nerd.
Oh yeah.
I've been, like. I was just telling one of my kids last night because she's starting her first fantasy football league, and I said, I started doing fantasy football when I was 14 in an era where, like, I would go to the Monday morning paper, open up the Washington Post, look for those box scores, and hand tabulate the scoring, right? And she was like, what? Box scores? What?
Back in the 1900s, Dad?
Yeah, exactly. But I will say, both, I love it, but it has been the sort of the substrate for relationship with my close friends from high school, right? Like, so I've been in the same league with guys from high school for 20-some years now.
Where'd you grow up?
California and Northern Virginia, ultimately.
Okay. Did you go to high school in Northern Virginia?
I did, yeah.
Where'd you go to high school
I went
at?
to TJ up there. It was Science and Tech School.
Got you.
Yeah.
So we're gonna help open that up a little bit. Who's your favorite team?
My favorite team, Philadelphia Eagles.
I'm an Eagles fan too.
Yeah, nice. So I lived in Philly, so we went to California, Philly for a couple of years.
They're gonna love you. You got you might have got a couple votes right there.
Nice. So it was the years. It was like Randall Cunningham and Reggie White, Andre Dirty Waters, and so I moved to Northern Virginia in the middle of the Redskins bandwagon, and so I'd see all these bumper stickers, and I was like that kid who wore the Eagles starter jacket every day to school.
Yeah.
So die hard.
Did you play sports growing up?
Played a lot of pickup basketball, but never was not big. I was really young when I went to school. So I started high school at 12. I graduated.
You started
at 16.
high school at 12.
Yeah.
So you're that. Hold on a minute.
Yeah.
You're that smart. No wonder he's the czar. My gosh, you was 12?
So I was always small and never so athletics weren't really my thing.
I mean, did you skip a few grades? Like, what happened? Did you start school at 3?
Again, Indian family. So I didn't go to kindergarten. I remember, in California, I remember my mom taking me into the principal's office. Like, I had all these. This is a nerd. This is terrible.
It's okay, man.
It's not good. It's not going to help me go.
It's actually, hey, being a nerd is super popular now, man. It's okay.
I hope so, dude. I hope so, Randy. No, but she would I would do all these workbooks. And so she took me into the principal's office and she was showing him the workbooks. And he was like, oh, yeah, he doesn't need to go to kindergarten. So I started first grade. I was 4 turning 5 right at the beginning of that, and so kind of was a little bit ahead, and then ended up graduating UVA in 3 years, and so I finished college at 19.
My goodness,
which is pretty wild. Yeah,
I mean, obviously your parents helped contribute a lot with the foundation of this. Okay, my goodness, you're into basketball?
Yeah.
What's your team? College and pro?
College, Virginia. I'm a UVA alum. And then...
I'm a Carolina guy.
Oh, yeah?
I didn't know that we were rivals until I came to Virginia. When I came to Virginia, I know this was a big deal. Like, we was thinking about Duke and State, but it's cool.
Yeah.
Wahoo.
So I like started to fall in love with the NBA when I was in high school. So I was growing up in DC. So
Oh my God,
I would
you
go to
serious?
Washington Bullets all the time, and then
man.
ultimately the Wizards. And
I'm sorry.
It's been hard. It's been
God,
a
it has
hard
been-
journey.
I'm a Charlotte
with
Hornet
the
fan,
Wiz.
so I know
mean,
it's.
Yeah,
I've empathized.
Although
Like,
you had like early on that Larry Johnson, Alonzo Mourning.
Oh, those
days.
were the
That
great
was
years.
Super exciting, right?
yeah, then we became Bobcats, and I don't know what happened that day. I was like, this is horrible. But thankfully, we got it back. And then we had Michael Jordan. I was like, this ain't good either.
Yeah.
But, did a resurrection where it's all, hey.
Well, he came to Washington too, don't you know?
Yeah, you got to tear it. Sometimes you got to tear it down to rebuild it, right?
That's right.
All right, so young Danny. Okay, I'm not talking about Danny married, and you're still a young man.
Okay.
But I'm talking about young Danny, younger Danny.
Yeah.
Who's your celebrity childhood crush?
Whew. Man. I feel like I came up in an era, probably like Jennifer Garner. That when I was in high school, yeah.
I don't know if I know Jennifer Garner, but I wouldn't know though. There's all things I don't know. Okay.
What else was she in? I don't know. A bunch of movies with Ben Affleck. I think she was married to Ben Affleck. It's
Okay.
She's now in the Capital One commercials.
Okay. I'm gonna go Google and find out. Okay. When you're driving in a car, or maybe on your way up here today, what would you listen to on the radio?
Sports radio.
Sports radio. So
Yeah.
you're a sports radio guy.
Yeah.
Podcasts too. Do you listen to podcasts
I
much?
don't actually get that much time to listen to stuff anymore. But if I do listen to a podcast, the one I love is Smartless.
Okay.
Do you know it?
Nope.
Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, Sean Hayes.
Smartly, but I mean, again, it sounds like it's smart. So maybe I need to catch up. So
Just funny dudes, and I think the vibe that I love is just these
Yeah.
are guys who, outside of the podcast, are just super good friends. And so
Yeah.
during COVID, they just started doing it online, and it became this massive sensation. And so it's a good laugh.
now you're a health guy.
Yeah.
So how healthy are you with your eating?
man,
Like,
Randy,
are you
ouch.
vegetarian, vegan? Do you eat bacon? Are you cautious? Where are we at?
Just twisted that knife right now.
We're trying to. We want to get familiar with our future leaders.
Oh, Randy.
Hey, listen. If you're gonna be the future leader of the city, it's important to us that you're healthy.
Yeah, well, I did walk about 4 miles last night, so I would say yes. I have. This is a season where both diet and exercise have been out the window, man. I'm just so much. Yeah, I mean the days are so full. Yeah, I mean it's meetings, it's people. It's when I get home at night. It's like catching up on email. So I have not been the model of health.
I mean, is it fair to say though that you might have a little bit of an advantage right now because you're full time in this thing?
I think most of us are. This is a hard thing to do without really devoting a pretty full-time existence to it. I mean, we're a big enough city where, like, to just get out on doors and to do the work. So I think most of us are probably doing this full-time. Yeah.
Hey, man, shout out your team. Like, tell me about your team that you got out there that's working with you right now.
Yeah.
Like, they're obviously going to watch this. Just give them a little bit of love.
Yeah, sure. No, it's been incredible, right? Especially for a newbie at this, right? Like I didn't know anything about politics, and so my campaign manager is one of our best lifelong friends. Her name's Lawson, and her husband and I were roommates back in college. And when we made that decision to move into the East End together, our families did that. We bought houses across the street from each other. We have raised our families in that neighborhood and been super invested in the East End together. Wow. And so, this has felt like a really like a continuation of our journey, both as families and in mission in the city together. And it's been really, really meaningful to have her as a partner in this. And then, I was both Lawson and my deputy campaign manager, Sarah, are these incredibly high-performing folks who have basically just said, hey, we believe enough in you. I mean, Lawson left her job. Sarah also left her job. She was an attorney. She left her job. Wow. And they said, we're going to give some months of our life to this. And
wow.
So, super grateful for their sacrifice. And then what we've had to do, because I'm not political, Lawson's never run campaigns, is that we have built a really good, experienced team of folks who have been deep in Democratic politics for a long time. And so they've been wonderful counselors and advisors through this.
I think it's kind of a good thing that the city that this doesn't become. I don't feel like this becomes a Democrat and Republican thing when it comes to running for mayor, because I mean, I guess it does. I guess when I guess it does play a factor if people know what your party is, but everyone's considered an independent, if I understand correctly, right?
Technically on the ballot, everybody's an independent. I think all 5 of us are registered Democrats. I'm not sure about one of the candidates, but and I would say, like we're a pretty progressive city, right? Like last presidential election, 83% Dem voting city, right? And so I do think politics will play a role for a couple of reasons. One, just sort of the ethos and where Richmond is as a city, but also because this election, people are going to come out for the presidential, right? Like there's so much energy around Kamala. Yeah, that's going to bring a lot of voters to the table who haven't really taken the time, may not even know that there are local elections happening, right? And so then there is, people who will just and there won't be a Democratic ticket because you're right, all the local folks are independent. But I think part of the key is making sure that there's like values alignment with a lot of those younger voters.
I think that's one of the things that's probably to your advantage also. Like a lot of people go to the polls and they particularly if it's not a D or R situation, they vote for who they heard of, who they know. And I think to your advantage, you have a name that's been recognizable. Not to dismiss the value of a vote. I mean, all votes, I think, listen, I'm the type of person where you earn my vote. I don't give it to you. So if I go to the ballot, I'm going to vote for the candidate that I feel like is best, who's earned it. But there are those situations and those certain things. There's going to be a lot of young people who's going to be first-time voters who have not did a research, who've not self-educated themselves, and they're just going to check.
Yeah, that's
and they're going to vote for the name that they recognize or have heard of or heard someone mention, or they may have heard on the Randy Wilson podcast.
Yeah, that's right.
So but I think that's something that you have in your favor.
Yeah, I would say it's a little. Yes, there's definitely an advantage there.
I don't want to devalue it. It's just, but I don't think it. When you look at your career, you've earned your way. You've earned the right for people to recognize and know your name.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
I think it'll be an advantage with some longer term Richmonders, and particularly those who were like clued in to the news during COVID. I think the reality is that a good chunk of our voting population has come post COVID. And so there's work to be done there. I think there's another reality here, which is that, I just recently came out of a Republican administration. I was the Commissioner of Social Services. And so the attacks already are coming on social media, and I have no doubt that the other candidates are going to like really lean into pointing out he's not a real Democrat.
Think about
he's
that.
worked for a Republican administration. And what they forget, and in some cases, like they haven't been around long enough to know that I was actually appointed by Governor Northam first, right? I was part of a Democratic administration and did a good enough job and built relationships on both sides of the aisle that I was retained by the next administration. And so I think for some more engaged active voters, they'll see that and say, oh, he's the kind of guy who like is super competent, has done a good job wherever he's gone, and can work with both sides. I think for some people, they'll say, I'm not sure I can vote for somebody who was associated with this most recent administration.
What reason are you not currently in that role? Did you step out when you got into the mayor race? Or?
Yeah, yes, exactly. I resigned to do this, to run for office.
I'm sure they hated to lose you.
I thought we were doing really good work. I mean, I think for me, I think some of the questions I have gotten is why would you make that transition? Oh shoot, sorry,
okay.
Randy.
This is real life. We can't edit that.
Why would you work in a Republican administration? And for me, first and foremost, like this commitment, my career has been not at all about politics. And ultimately about public service. And second, like the role that I stepped into as Commissioner of Social Service was this incredible opportunity to serve 2 million low-income Virginians and to try to create pathways to get better access to benefits, try to create pathways out of poverty, stabilize the foster care system. So, it was really important and meaningful work, and I wouldn't trade it for a second.
As I shared before the interview, I've been really good at helping other people get in these positions. Not been so fortunate myself.
Yeah.
But I think when you're in the business to me, it's a ministry in its own right. Like you're in the it's the business of improving people's health, improving people's life, improving the community. Like there's no D or R that really should be in the midst of that. I think the politics That ends up being half the problem in regard to why it's one world, right? One city.
That's right.
One country.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? We got all these things that divide us, whether it's private or public or for profit or nonprofit or R or a D.
Yeah.
It's
and
just,
that becomes even more true at the local level, right? Because, whoever we elect as the next leader of this city has got to represent everybody,
Yes.
right? And the work is not about some of these big policy issues that need to get sorted out at the federal level.
Yeah.
The work is about how are we making our city more functional, more responsive, and how are we making our community a place where everybody feels valued and a part of the future of Richmond.
yeah. But this has been great.
Yeah.
I definitely enjoyed it. Before we go, make sure you let our listeners know how they can support you, where they can follow you, and
Yeah,
whatever
absolutely.
you got to close with.
My website is DannyForMayor.com. I'm continually surprised that there was not another Danny somewhere in the country running for mayor, but DannyForMayor.com. We're on Instagram, Facebook, X, and LinkedIn. So would love for you to follow me there and go to the website for updates on the campaign, policy priorities, upcoming events. If you want a yard sign deliver, one of our systems, pop your address in there and someone will deliver it within a couple of days.
Great. This has been Danny Avula on the Randy Wilson podcast. Remember, you can find this podcast everywhere podcasts are played. We are covering all candidates running for mayor. So continue to stay engaged because you will hear from them all. And it's up to you guys to make the decision on behalf of who is going to lead the city. The power is in your hands. So thank you guys for tuning into this episode, and we're out.